Good afternoon. So we start our presentation and we start our seminar. And I would like to start with saying that it's a very important day for me. It's a very important day for us because today, we present for your judgment, for your comments, for your critique, the results of our project, of our research initiative, which is called Analyzing Post-Soviet Reform Proposals. We would like to discuss the results. And first, I will introduce myself briefly and our team. I'm Irina Busygina. I'm a political scientist, and I work at the Data Center. And our beloved team is here. So I will present them how they're sitting. So this is Pavel Penyazik, an expert on Belarus. Dasha Zhukaskaite, expert on Moldova. Valerie Brown, expert on Kazakhstan. These are our three countries, but we will explain a little bit later what was our case selection and why. And what was the idea? And what was the main goal of this initiative? The main goal was a very big goal. You know, you can formulate a goal in different ways. But generally, if I would be asked to formulate it in a very abstract way, the most abstract as I could, I would say that this initiative is to advance the understanding of political process in the post-Soviet region. But not only to have this dynamics, or what are these processes? What we wanted to do, we wanted to look at the variation. The variation is one of the most important words for us. Variation among the post countries, we still call post-Soviet. Why do we call them post-Soviet? Why do we call this region post-Soviet? Probably one of the explanations would be that we don't know any other word. We would like to replace the word post-Soviet with something different, because probably we don't like it. And somehow we feel intuitively that it does not reflect the reality, or it does not reflect it in a full scale. We would like to explain the whole thing. But we still call it post-Soviet. Okay, let's call it post-Soviet, but is it still post-Soviet? And when we are talking about about what's going on there, is it still post-Soviet, not post-Soviet? A lot of people, and probably this is a certain consensus among the experts, saying that this is a disintegration or fragmentation of this post-Soviet space that was accelerated, this process that was accelerated with the war, the Russian war against Ukraine now since 3 years. But when we come to criteria, how can we test? Is it disintegrating? Is it fragmenting? What could we look at? There are many ways we understand that there are many points of entry of how you can look at this fragmentation slash disintegration. You can look at economic indicators, you can look at social indicators, you could look at infrastructure, but there are also other ways, I would say, more related to political science. Since we are political scientists here, what we would like to do, our point of entry was the reforms and reform projects, ongoing reforms and reform projects. As one of the possible, and I'm concerned, important points of entry. So the first word, important word would be variation. The second keyword for our research initiatives would be reforms. Reforms, again, ongoing reforms and reform projects. And looking at the reforms, just one very small idea to add. For me, looking at the reforms, this is about the future. This is when you say the word reform, you think about either building the future. When you make the ongoing reform projects, you build the future. The elites, national elites, are building the future. When you look at the reform proposals or reform projects, which are being elaborated by elites, incumbent elites, or elites in their position, you're not thinking, it's not about building the future, but about thinking about the future. The basic question is, do the elites of the post-Soviet countries think and make their future differently? And here come our question. So this is what we study, and our question, what are these basic contents? So what are these reforms about? Reforms and reform projects. What are their main goals? Are they different in their main goals? Do they position themselves differently, you know, in this, what we want our country to look like? Are these projects internally consistent? What role is played by the Soviet legacy? Again, returning to the question, is this region still a post-Soviet region? And what role is played by the external actors? Russia, China, US, European Union. So These were my slides, and now we continue the presentation. Valerie.
Great, thank you, Irina. So for our project, we focus on the institutional reforms proposed by incumbent and oppositional elites, both within their countries and in exile. What do we mean by institutional reforms? These are institutional, not sectoral. They entail changing the Constitution through amendments to reflect changing societal values and needs. They also entail changing the distribution of power between the president and parliament, the formation of the parliament, the electoral rules, and the laws on political parties. They also entail carrying out federalization and decentralization and significant changes in foreign policy. We're interested essentially in reforms implying a change in the country's developmental model through the modification of its political system. So as far as our case selection, our sample represents a pretty broad variation across the countries of the region. All of them share a Soviet legacy, but we have a diversity of geographic locations, Europe for Moldova and Belarus, and Asia for Kazakhstan. Territorial size, so we have smaller countries, Belarus and Moldova, to larger countries such as Kazakhstan. Also quite a spectrum of resource endowment. We have Kazakhstan, which is very resource rich, and that's tied kind of into its political system. And we also have resource poor economies like Moldova and Belarus. We also have a diversity of actors involved in developing the reform projects. So we have incumbent elites, which is the case in Moldova and Kazakhstan, and elites in opposition in exile, which is the case for Belarus. And here we have a beautiful visualization of our countries of interest, which was generated by our lovely Dasha. I'll go on to the next slide.
As Valerie has pointed out, all of these countries have very different historical structural entry points, and that being both pre-Soviet past as well post collapse of the Soviet Union. So to ensure that there is some similarity and empirical rigor in pursuing all these subjects, we had a two-dimensional methodology, and that entails both at first comparison of reforms and reform projects, where every single one is perceived as a structural political initiative that is unique in its own self, and then cross-country comparison of wider structural factors. And this was done by conducting 4 steps: first country profiles using wider databases ranging from CIA to World Bank, and then identifying the said reforms. A little bit more in the resources will come later, and then comparative analysis that includes 4 parts, in which we'll delve in a second. And as a final last step, cross-country comparison between these very unique cases. So the 4 parts of country analysis basically follow kind of process tracing and path dependency, because the historical and structural factors that play a role in this country, and not necessarily the Soviet past, are actually quite crucial. So we briefly reconstructed major reforms and what triggered them, because in every single case, there was a clear catalyst that sparked events. And then we looked at context and main source of their reform, who started them. We were curious about questions: what events enabled them? Is there a full transition or isolated reforms? What is the vision? Because some countries clearly define themselves. For instance, Moldova project is called European Moldova within vision or normative discourse. And whether the past is interpreted within these platforms, do they touch upon it? Do they view it negatively? Do they view it positively? Institutional changes in themselves also posed quite a bit of quandaries, whether it's just amendments, or do they want to wipe out the political system altogether? Do they want to repeal old news? In some cases, there was proposition of changing the way the parliament works, transitioning it into bicameral one. Is the foreign policy shift entailed in this? And how does foreign policy play this deeply domestic politics as well, is actually a very good question. And the cross-country comparison is looking as a country in a whole and putting it in perspective towards others. So a little bit about our sources. They're diverse, multi-level document analysis, both with primary documents, and that entails the reform proposition itself, and archival party documents, which are quite extensive for the region, I'd say. And then constitutional text, because most of these do have to do with the legal amendments. And secondary sources kind of existed to ensure depth of the perspective, and they ranged from think tanks as well as governmental reports or EU, UN, and academic scholarship on the matter. So there's 4 reforms that were identified for Belarus. All of them are conducted by oppositionist elites in exile. So we kind of will call Belarus as imagined reforms. In Moldova, there is 2 projects that are very polar opposites in their ends. And Kazakhstan has only one, and it's something that Valerie, who worked on Kazakhstan, referred to as cautioned or controlled reforms conducted by the incumbent elites. So that's kind of the main difference. In Belarus, all are oppositional, and Moldova, both are incumbent and oppositional elites, and Kazakhstan just incumbent. And to present this in a nicer slide, there's this visualization to understand it. And what's very interesting is that all 3 countries, as it has been mentioned, do have this Soviet legacy, which usually earns them this title of post-Soviet countries in Western policymaking especially. However, what they show is very different case studies for opposing views both within IR and political science. So, for instance, Belarus and Moldova are much more similar to this reverse second image that was proposed by Steve Walz as well as Peter Gorevich, that foreign policy influences your domestic policy, so external factors matter, whereas Kazakhstan was much more in line with Robert Putnam or Graham Allison, where your domestic policy in turn influences your foreign policy. And as you can see, there's a clear outline towards which actor, or whether actors play a role as such, and lenience towards them. Belarus is 0, as in Belarus, the government right now has no reforms, and it's basically attached to Russia due to the agreement reform. Some military analysts predict as full unification by 2030. So there's nothing to compare there. But the Imagine Belarus, which is for project, has quite interesting pro-EU settlements. So to talk more about Soviet legacy, that would be our next slide.
Yeah, so I'm here to share the exciting part of our research, which is some of the findings. So in all 3 country cases, the Soviet legacy is not an overwhelmingly important reference point. The reformers we looked at don't use the Soviet past either as an example of a desirable future or as a negative example, like something that should never be repeated. In Kazakhstan, however, the Soviet past did play a minor role. Tokayev, in the March 2022 address, during which he announced his reform package, referenced the Soviet stagnation as a sort of warning. And through that, he underscored the potential negative economic and political outcomes if the reforms he deemed fundamental to Kazakhstan's development are not realized. So what we found in terms of democratization is that while democratization is the goal of the reforms carried out, or I should say the stated goal of the reforms carried out by the current elites in Moldova and the reform projects of the Belarusian elites in exile, in Kazakhstan, the goal of reforms is to more improve the quality of governance and the competitiveness of the country while maintaining a better version of the autocratic regime. Nargis Kasenova writes a little bit about this. So while we do see some liberalization happening in Kazakhstan, there is fundamentally a difference between democratization and liberalization, this sort of gradual opening of the country. So we also explored decentralization. So the reforms and the reform projects in all 3 countries envisaged decentralization, not at the regional level, but at the level of self-government. So decentralization looks like a universal tool for strengthening democratic institutions and improving the quality of governance. Moldova complicates this a little bit because in this case, federalization can be weaponized as an attempt to institutionalize divisions, which often run along regional lines, to gain leverage in domestic politics.
What's the third country? Kazakhstan, Moldova, and the third one?
Belarus.
Belarus.
Joke. Okay, so the findings about the Russian factor. The free country, like Russia for all the free countries, is important, but in really different way. Like for example, for Belarus, Russia is one of the main point of the reference in the foreign affairs. However, it pushes some elites toward the European Union. Like for example, think about Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So they are really oriented to the West. They understand that, for example, that is for them it's the main orientation, and they should follow like a integration with European Union as much as possible. However, for the some reformist elite, like a Russian factor, it is actually a paralyzing thing, because they are afraid that in Belarus can be repeated with Ukrainian scenarios, so can be use of force, and because of that, they are afraid of going too radically towards the European Union or towards the West. So they want to rather become like neutral, stay somewhere between Russia and the European Union. To some extent, it's like a more progressive way how Lukashenko was trying to balance for the many years. However, in the end, it ended, as we know, not in the best optimistic way. For Moldova, Russia is both a security threat and an actor that have like a negative and positive influence on elite behavior. So if you think about the project of federalization, it was entirely crafted in Moscow by one of the closest political allies, Dmitry Kozak, and they are trying to actually institutionalize divisions within Moldova to entrench Russian leverage over domestic politics. But Russian full-scale invasion in Ukraine actually mobilized a lot of pro-European elites to accelerate the reform and to be more determined on the path to joining or integrating with the European Union. And for the Kazakhstan, Russia, of course, is as well like one of the most important allies. So they supported the so-called reformer candidate Tokayev when he called in the Collective Security Treaty Organization's forces during attempted coup of January 2022. But on the other hand, they are indifferent to the reforms up to certain thresholds. So as long as Kazakhstan is not trying to repeat any kind of color revolution, Russia is not really interfering into Kazakhstan. And concerning the conservative versus reformist elites, again, we have like really different situation between these three countries, because like in Belarus, we have reproduction of Soviet type elites which block reforms in order to preserve consolidated authoritarian regime, and new elites which are more progressive, more reformist. They were forced actually to leave, or they are in prison, so they had no chance actually at the moment to make any impact in the country, or really limited. They have really limited impact in the country, and however, they have really developed programs how to do that. And so like the Belarusian opposition is actually really well organized, and they have like a lot of initiatives, a lot of projects for how to change the country. But at the moment, they tools how to implement there are really limited. In case of Moldova, this conflict is actually the most vivid because it's happening inside the country. So you have the pro-European elites, as well as the conservative, more pro-Russian elites inside the country who are actually struggling. Who will win that? The idea of the geopolitical orientation and how they reform the country. And in Kazakhstan, at the same time, there is no real conflict at the moment. Because an Nazarbayev faction was purged and the reform course is implemented by conservative elites. So yeah, we have like three different ways of how there is these reforms between how the conservative and reformist elites are looking at the reforms, what are the tools and how they can implement that, and the possibilities of doing so.
I will do the last slide. This will be the last one, but before I will I will do the last slide. I want to say special thank you to Dasha. Dasha, thank you very much, because visualization was Dasha's endeavor, Dasha's creativity. Спасибо. Thank you. Now, so this is the last slide where we tried again to summarize the conclusions and probably to see some avenues for future research. As I told you in the very beginning, and I started from this, one of the keywords is variation. So did we see variation? We see a lot of variation among our selected countries, our 3 country cases, with respect to different things, with respect to ongoing reforms and reforms project, and as it was already laid down by Valerie and Pavel. So this is the dimensions of this variation. The goals of reforms, the agents of reforms, incumbent or opposition elites, the role of the Russian factor works very differently in all 3 cases, and also the structure of splits and cleavages between conservative and reformist elites. What I wanted to say regarding the avenues of future research. First, the project is not finished yet, I hope, because the project still has potential. And these are only some findings. These are not all the findings which we can extract, having all the material and time. Material we collected and time spent on this collection and on our meetings, regular meetings, and thinking, and then meeting again, and then reading again, and again. So it's not finished. More research. What I see as a good thing to do would be, it's not here included to this slide, but I will start from this. This is dyadic comparison. So this is a comparison one country to the other country from all 3 cases, because what we did together, because till now we tried to compare all 3 cases. So these findings that we have now and showed to you, they relate to all 3 cases. However, the material we collected and the methodology allows us to compare 2 countries. And then we will see more things to discuss, and more probably deeper conclusions and findings. So this is the first thing. The other thing, this is on the slide, is to compare concrete institutional changes. So what is, we didn't have time to do that because first we were concentrated on more broader comparison of the 3 countries, but you can compare concrete institutional steps, meaning what Dasha said, how you want to change the constitution, how you want to change do you want to decentralize? Do you want to centralize? Do you want to federalize? What about local self-government? What about the role of the parliament versus the role of the president? Many of the projects are about that. Exactly. So concrete institutional steps and changes, and see how consistent they are. Is it really a project? This would be also nice for me. This is nice to think, kind of in a paradoxical manner, what these projects do not discuss, because they discuss something, and what the reformers do not discuss before they start the reform, or already in the reform course. For instance, the question would be, which would I think it's important, like in the case of Belarus, exactly. What about all the elites? If you realize your fantastic reform proposals, and we have 4 of them. All of them are about more normal Belarus, not that Russian Belarus, closer to European Belarus. But what is about incumbent elites? What about Lukashenko and his guys? The reformers, if they think that their projects have chances to be realized one day, what will happen? Do they disappear? This is, by the way, this is the same with Russia. If the new reformists are coming to Russia, what will be with the Putin's men? What is how because it's not tabula rasa that you are going to have to implement your project. Absolutely not. Are you prepared to negotiate what will be the compromises with the other elite groups with their projects? So these are important questions which should be discussed, absolutely, because this is the whole problem of institutional design. So it's very important, and we didn't have time to discuss them, but they exist and they're waiting for us. Expanding the case selection. This is also important. We took 3 countries, but there are other post-Soviet countries which can show us more variation and more interesting dimensions of variation. And here I'm thinking about Uzbekistan, probably, but even more so, I'm thinking about Armenia and Georgia. I think these are very promising cases to discuss with our framework, with our methodology. And the last thing that we can exploring, we made an attempt to explore a Russian case, but we didn't bring it to the end. But the initial idea was to include Russia. However, Russia is a very specific case. I try to lay it down here, probably not very well, but hopefully you understand what I mean, because Russia is also a producer of reformer projects. We are also collecting. We were collecting the reform proposals which exist about Russia's future. There are a lot of them. Right now, I think it was yesterday in the Moscow Times. It was the article of Vladislav Inozemtsev regarding the reform proposal of Memorial Group under the name 100 дней после Putina, 2 days, 100 days after Putin. Huge project, huge. Do you know how many pages? 1,000 pages. It's more than 1,000 pages. 1,160 pages. Yeah. So this is all about reforms, and there are other many different reforms. There are Free Russia Foundation reforms. Yeah. So they're discussing reforms. So this is a lot discussed in the opposition. The opposition, which is inside the country, it's like in Belarus. It's not inside Russia. But at the same time, what makes the Russian case unique, that at the same time, this imagined Russia is outside Russia, but its real Russia is inside Russia, and its role is to constrain, to put constraint on the reforms of the other countries. We know what Russia is doing against the European reforms, pro-European reforms in Moldova and in the other countries. We all know that, but we need to be able to very. I think it's a need to study it more systematically and again. So making a circle with the how. This is about the future. This is about the present future, but this is about the future. So, and this is about the variation within this very large and very important region, which we still consider to be post-Soviet and which is actually not. Thank you very much. We would like to thank you all. And now, please, yeah, should I say comments? Yeah, comments, questions, critique. Do criticize us. Yeah, we like it. So this is the ownership is ours. So this project is ours. It's not mine. No. It's their project. So ask them questions. Who's going to moderate? Should I do it? Yeah, please. Mikhail, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and congratulations on this impressive accomplishment. You indeed get credit for comparing something that many people would say is incomparable, right? Because they are two different, Kazakhstan and Belarus and Moldova, but there are, of course, plenty of characteristics that sort of bring them together. And my question is about one such characteristic, which you might be covering in your report, but I haven't heard it explicitly, so you might just want to elaborate on that. So how much demand is there for reform in all those countries? Otherwise, it's really tough to compare Kazakhstan to Moldova. But if we take this dimension of demand for reform, we may really sort of learn something about those countries. And as far as I remember from some political economy literature about this initial post-communist reforms of the early 90s in both sort of post-USSR and Eastern and Central Europe, the main distinction was that in Central Eastern European countries like Hungary or Poland, the public wanted more reform despite the initial pain from shock therapy, from whatever came their way as a result of those initial moves. Whereas in Russia, at least, but I believe that was the same in almost all the post-Soviet republics, except perhaps the Baltics, in there, the public immediately wanted to backtrack after this initial pain of the loss of status internationally and shock therapy and devaluation of the national currency and you name it. So the main distinction that allowed Central Eastern Europeans to proceed with reforms and eventually achieve something by mid-1990s on one hand, and the post-Soviet countries that effectively got stuck despite expectations of their, transition. The main difference was the willingness to tolerate the pain and ask for more, which I guess is defined by some optimism, historical optimism as to whether we can get to something better eventually, right? So is there a way to assess the demand for reform in those country cases, right? And of course, the trope that comes to mind, and that's my final line here, is that we are optimistic about the future, and we don't know what comes between now and the future, and about that, I'm pessimistic. But maybe you're going to dispel this notion by telling us that they do want more reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to just?
I think Moldova is the easiest one to gauge opinion on reforms because it's more or less, it is far more democratic than the other two cases, and there are opinion polls. And I think historically, Moldova is actually one of the most reformist former Soviet Union republics, and it has to do with the oppositional elites usually utilize them to it's kind of negative comparison to the others. Say, oh, look, incumbents elites, they have this presidential system and they're abusing it, so let's make it semi-presidential. And then the next elections, they say, okay, let's return it back to presidential. And the amendments in Moldova, those 10 constitutional amendments in the history of Moldova, which is quite extensive. And at first, there was quite strong support for that, but then people realized that this is just a ploy for political legitimacy of the elites rather than actual change. However, that has changed up to 2014, and that was a catalyst for Moldova. The grand theft, as they call it, the 1 billion euros that were stolen from 4 banks in just 3 days, and no one's been technically punished for it. I mean, Dodon and Shora officially is a citizen of Russia as of September 2024, and he's there at all of the main meetings, and that was a real catalyst because even though Maya Sandu's party didn't come to power right then, it builds upon this momentum of anti-corruption. We want change, and they utilize this momentum for change. And there was a poll conducted in 2024. 52 of Moldovans wanted reforms that are pro-EU, and I feel like a very large part of legitimacy for these reforms, for the first time in post-2010 history of Moldova, comes from the fact that these reforms are often co-authored with reliable external partners. So USAID was quite important in constructing some of the transparency, for instance, framework. EU is helping author some of the other reforms. And I think, for instance, Maya Sandu's party, which is one of the main actors for European pro-Moldovan reforms, they understand that there is this fatigue with reform. So the way they phrase them is this integrationist approach. She's the first person who came into power not on Transnistria. She did not run it at all. In fact, her approach towards it was let's sweep it under the rug and approach it by solving people's everyday problems on the ground with the EU. So easier commute, exchange rate, let's open some contours closer to the border. And so there's awareness of the sweariness of reforms, but there is desire for them when they're done in a less traditional, like Moldovan sense of politics being run on corruption and lack of transparency before, at least for Moldova, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe Pavel and you, Valerie, very very briefly about your countries, and then I will kind of say some more general things.
Yeah, in the case of Belarus, of course, we can say there was at least huge demand for reforms because there were elections of 2020 when possibly Svetlana Tikhanovskaya actually won the elections, and there were like a huge protest, but they were just brutally crushed. But still, I believe there is so there is no real data what's the need for the reforms at the moment and how people are willing to do so. But we can imagine that still at least some people who stayed in the country are really want to change the situation, but there is no possibility to do so because of the pure violence.
Valerie?
Yeah, in the Kazakhstan case, it's evident that the kind of ruling regime sort of acknowledges this popular desire for reform. I mean, Tokayev, in his March 2022 speech, explicitly references the January 2022 protests, which, I mean, were spread across Kazakhstan and were kind of related to ongoing corruption and inequality. So, I mean, I think just a lot of these countries that we're looking at are sensing this pressure from below that's sort of embodied in popular protest.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mikhail. I wanted to say two things more generally about what you said. Thank you very much. There are two things which are kind of take your comment from different angles. The first thing about kind of selection. When you're making a project, this is a research initiative. You have to make a selection or to make a choice. This is a tough choice. What you want to do and what you don't want to do. So this is our initiative is basically about elites. It's not about public attitude. So this is I would say that it would be one of the thank you very much. It would be one of the very good ways to make progress with the project, to develop the project, to introduce the demand for reforms, the public attitudes. But this was not the initial goal. The initial goal and the premise was that these reforms, that the elites are the creators and implementers of reforms. And they're capable of doing that if they're incumbent, like in Moldova and Kazakhstan. Yeah, in Belarus, this is the other way because they are the incumbent and it's a blocking reforms. But again, was a project about elites. This is a deliberate choice of us. But it would be nice to include it. The second thing I wanted to say that, however, somehow we tried to elaborate not on demands on reforms, but what I would call a привычка к реформам, on the habit of reforms. Because in some countries, like in Belarus for me, so this is when you have no reforms for decades, when your political system is not moving, and then the conservative elites blocking the reforms, then you can expect that the public attitudes would be the case and the reforms of 90s like in Russia propagated as likhie 90 is something very bad. Reforms are when you lose. You can only lose with the reforms. Reforms something very bad. So this is no habit of reforms. However, the situation in Moldova, I suppose, what I got from reading Dasha's expertise was that the reforms are the routine. The country is all the time under reform. So the people are used. So the citizens are used to being reformed all the time. And this is very different. It's not about it's a different attitude towards reform. It's good and bad. So this is very kind of many sides of this thing. But still, so we try to elaborate on that. But thank you again. Yeah. Please.
I have two questions regarding the meaning of institutional reforms. Firstly, how did you differentiate between institutions of legislation, so parliamentary structures? So in Belarus, right, they have no functional public assembly, basically, versus like executive branch reforms. And then the second question, also stemming from Belarus, is have you looked at public enterprises and how those play in? Because I imagine this is the one sector, right, where these three countries might have the most common Soviet legacy. How you manage public enterprises, how open is your market, right? Belarus pretty much did its halfway privatization. Kazakhstan, I think, like in strategic sectors as well, is very government dominated. So how would you differentiate those two sectors?
Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much to your question. I will start with the second one, and this is about public enterprises. Yes, this is an important dimension. No, this is not in the scope of what we studied, because this is not about institutional reforms, at least what we were meaning under institutional reforms. This nationalization, privatization thing, again, it's very important, it's very telling, but this is more, for me at least, I don't know if my colleagues would agree with me, but this is more sectoral reforms, and this is about stateness, this is about statehood, this is about the role of the state. So this is it for me. It follows a slightly different perspective and slightly different literature, I would say. Although I would never deny that this is unimportant. I'm particularly looking what is going on in Russia, and in Russia this is also a very hot debate now. Concerning the institutions, we built on the literature on the institutional design. So we just look at the formal institutions. So this is what we should have said. So we don't look at and what should be included into the presentation and what we didn't include. This is my fault. We understand for that a lot of politics, a lot of the huge kind of share of politics in this states. This is informal politics. right? So this is about informal institutions. This is about patronal politics. Look at what, for instance, Henry Hale was and is writing, and so on and so forth. This is you can make us this think. Why don't you study informal politics? The most simple reason would be because it's only one research initiative, because it would need a very different approach, very different. And we were looking at the just as simple as that. So this is the formal institution. So how you want to reshape the formal institutions, not how they are going to function, right? This is a different question. How they should look from the formal side. So what you think would be good for a country. However, how the reforms how this institution would function very much depend on the informal side, on the legacy, on the role of the state, on many things. We wanted to limit ourselves with looking at the formal institutional changes, identifying like each book on comparative politics identify the main institutions in any national polity. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much. This is a very exciting initiative, and I can't wait to read whatever paper you guys produce. Two questions, if I may. Number one, I was wondering if you could comment a little bit more on how do international organizations factor into this? Here I'm thinking of both, advisory and what is what Dasha, you mentioned USAID, but also IMF conditionality and these very solid conditions that they impose on countries for reform. And my second question would be, how do you see kind of the process of reform learning where one country might look at another and implement those lessons into their own progress, or do you not consider it at all? So thanks.
Thank you.
I mean, I guess Moldova again is a good case for this. It has the most prominent presence of international organizations, and there was wariness on behalf of EU specifically with all of the reforms that stem from Moldova, exactly because the volume of them was so immense and nobody saw any results yielded. And EU actually considered before 2016, they started underfunding all of the NGOs because the NGOs were used by local Moldovan elites for their use. And what really changes that is, again, Maya Sandu's party, PAS, and or PAS in English. And here conditions are a bit of a different thing, because if you embark on EU accession, which Moldova is, it's a candidate member at this point, you have a clear threshold of everything you need to meet. So all of the reforms they undertake are exactly within these steps that they need to have. One of the largest ones for this is local self-governance, because for Moldova, historically, it's a very painful thing. They implemented all of the reforms required for EU in the 90s, but then socialists come to power, they reverse everything back to the Soviet rayonas. So it's a bit of an interesting thing, because they have these conditions, but they kind of want the conditions because they want to be part of the EU. I think the funding played an important role, USAID specifically, so it'll be interesting to see what the outcome of the parliamentary elections in September will be without it. Because in Moldova, if you open the Socialist Party, all of the oppositional parties that are clearly sponsored by Russia, they mock that. They say, oh, you have a master, your master abroad is no longer sponsoring you, so you're going to decay, stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, in case of Belarus, there was a lot of support, of course, of for the opposition elites from the outside, because they're as well in exile. So they are mostly based in Poland and Lithuania. And in general, if you look at the reforms, they are rather liberal, and so they want to follow the European Union requirements as well. So they are pretty happy to align with these ideas. But as well, there is a lot of there is as well trying to navigate between all the demands of the Western world and their own finding, their own understanding of the things, because if you look at the programs, there is a lot about actually social security and things like that. So there is a way. It's not the same Central Eastern European countries which were transforming in the end of the 80s, 90s, where it was this crazy capitalism without constraints. Now it's already more conscious, and there is much more social approach towards that as well, which is really interesting. If there will be any possibility of implementing these reforms, how actually it would look like in the end, and how much of this program will be implemented on the ground, how it look like in reality.
So in the case of Kazakhstan, as you can probably imagine, a big difference from the countries who kind of envision a future EU accession. A lot of the literature that I looked at, I mean, didn't really reference international organizations. I mean, as you know, in these contexts, I think many of the leaders are wary, to say the least, of international, like the influence of international organizations. I will say, in terms of the people who are sort of like being incorporated into the Tokayev government and state institutions, I would say that there is sort of an international influence because I think recently he not only did he sort of like resuscitate the Constitutional Court, he also allowed a scholar, I think, from KIMEP to kind of be one of the sort of officials of the international or like the Constitutional Court. So I think there is going to be a bit of a Western influence that's allowed, but international orgs don't play a big role in conclusion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like here to add something. I would like to add something about Kazakhstan, if Valerie allows me to do that. So this is what Kazakhstan is a very interesting case with this regard, because my impression, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not an expert in Kazakhstan particularly, but I have an impression that this is a big difference between policy reforms and institutional political reforms. How you allow international organizations intervene, how eager you are to invite the international organizations to give you advices on this, because I see from in particular from my talks with Nargis Kasenova, we share the office with you, so she leads the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center, and just now, right now, I think today or tomorrow, she has the conference on green energy.
Which I'm organizing.
Yes, yeah. So this is this. So Kazakhstan is learning and inviting in the policy reforms. I don't know, is it declarative? Is it substantial? So how they make it? This is about a question of learning. How they learn. So I don't think that they learn that much from each other, but they learn from the other reference cases broader. So, so I with Kazakhstan, I know an example which I was studying for a certain time. This is organic agriculture in Kazakhstan, and then they learn a lot about from Germany, a lot, and this goes very difficult, with organic agriculture in Kazakhstan. But still, it goes. But the reference point is Germany. But from this is one side. So they invite a lot of international organizations making the conference, going. So. But this is not about political reforms. In the political reforms is none. And this is also interesting. When I don't think, I never heard, like Valerie, that Tokayev would ask the international advisors how to change how to change his system politically, and how to make this threshold to make better authoritarianism, but not a democratic country. So this is this kind of very interesting. Kazakhstan is extremely interesting case, I think. However, what I wanted to say, the last point, the idea was also was one of the initial ideas, and this is also about the future. What came to my mind? I want to make a better future for my country. I want to be like whom? Like whom I want to be. So what do these elites have in mind as an ideal when they are talking about the future of their country? You know, this is a saying, getting to Denmark. We want to be all like Denmark. But we are not. Definitely. And for some countries, this is the way is even not possible. However, so I try to formulate: do these countries want to be like Europe? Do they want the other option would be normal country? We want just to be a normal country, and I think this is like Belarus. Belarus want to be neutral country, right? And yeah. I mean in the reform project.
They want to be like a neutral, and actually they are often saying that it's like a negative identification. We don't want to be country like we are right now. So they want to reverse the situation, and that's again like coming the normal country. So they're actually saying that the situation in our country is not normal, but we want to bring normality back or make normality.
Yeah. And Kazakhstan, they want to be, Valerie, they want to be like whom? Does Tokayev has an ideal in mind?
I don't think he really articulated an image. I think they just want to be as developed as possible.
Yeah. But this is also my my view. But in Kazakhstan, they have it in a different way. They don't have in mind like we want to be like a certain country, Singapore, for instance. But we want to be competitive. We want to be competitive in the global economy without particularly mentioning we don't be like country A or country B. We want to be competitive. For whom? For the investors, for the international investors. So we want to have better quality of governance. And so this is the idea of Kazakhstan without pointing on any particular reference. It still has a lot of external dimension. We want to convince the outsiders that we are this, and this, and not this, and that. Yeah, corrupt nation, structurally weak nation, and nation where the institutions don't work. So and nothing works. So this.
Sorry, I just because I didn't actually answer the second question, but I think in case Belarus is as well like negative learning. So the case of Ukraine is actually the thing like which is restraining a lot of elites from going too fast towards the European Union, or maybe like joining NATO or something like that in the future. Like it was not on the table at all, but in general integration with the West. Because they are just afraid that can cause like a negative reaction from Russia, or even including like using military force. But on the other hand, as well, like if you look at the reformists like Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, so they are like closely tied to Poland and Lithuania as well. So there is like a lot of impact on that. They are talking with people there. So there is like some references towards Poland. And even if this capitalism, like with capitalist reform, are not the same like in the 90s. So, but this like a spirit of the 80s, 90s, it's still somewhere there. So they imagining one kind of the transition, like something similar to the Polish round table, for example. So they have actually few ways of seeing how the change of the government could happen, but one of them is like all the elites and new elites just will meet and discuss and make like a single conference.
Thank you.
And can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the sense that this is very interesting, further goes to show the difference in the Soviet legacy and how it's perceived, because for Moldova, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine showed it as an example. We need to accelerate this. They have, after all, even though Russia is actively in Transnistria, but they have Ukraine separating them from mainland Russia. And they saw it as a sign we need to really double down on the European future. And it showed not only in the elite behavior, but also in people's polls. So it was kind of another catalyst for pro-reforms. So it's a kind of, I guess, geographical proximity to EU and away from Russia played a positive role.
Okay, well, thank you guys very much. Congratulations. I can't wait to see how this unfolds further. I have two questions. One is that in discussing institutions, you spoke a lot about, or alluded to at any rate, the executive branch and the legislative branch, and made no mention of the judicial branch. So I'm very curious, because my kind of anecdotal impressionistic experience in living in Russia suggests that lack of reform there plays a really important role. So I'm very interested to hear about, is it just that these reform projects don't touch on the judicial branch, or did you decide that that was too arcane and needed to be left for later? So I'm just curious to hear about your work and your thoughts on that. And then the second question is, I know that initially when you set out for this project, the hope was to create a matrix that could be applied to comparable research in other post-Soviet states. And I'm wondering where you feel that matrix stands. Do you feel like it's 90% of the way done, 50% of the way done? Are you, is it still a work in progress?
I will answer the second question. And what do you think?
Yeah, I would love to comment on the first question. So, I mean, fundamentally, we were looking at like institutional reforms. So like changes in state-society relations. And I mean, at least in my research, that did encompass the judicial branch. I think just in my presentation, I didn't really speak to that as much. But I mean, Tokayev's reform package in Kazakhstan in particular sort of revived the constitutional court. And in some cases, I don't know, maybe this is just another manifestation of this sort of like creation of an external image, but in establishing the constitutional court to which any citizen of Kazakhstan can appeal, he is sort of acknowledging the rule of law as opposed to by law, which was the case in like during Nazarbayev's tenure. So yeah, that does factor into our analysis.
Yeah, in case of Belarus, which was interesting again, because what we are talking about, the bringing back normality, it was rather not reform, but re-establishing norms. So they don't want to change so much in the case of the jurisdiction, like for example, constitutional court, but they rather want to just make it work how it should work. So they, because like for example, for reformist elites, the usual thing when you need to start is from the free elections, and they need like a support of the constitutional court in general, having like a working election commission. So they need all this space to make clear, and because it's as well like thing with right now Belarus has like really dubious constitution, and a lot of changes where are like one of the main goal of the reformist elites is to bring back the old constitution from when the before Lukashenko, like when the Lukashenko took over and still was like intact. So the first constitution of Belarus, so bringing back and getting back to these standards and maybe then make some changes. It's really important for them, but they need to have like a really working setting to do so. So they don't need to like reform it; they need to make it working at the beginning.
Same for Moldova. For the European project, it views it as bringing back to normalcy. They don't propose actually anything. It is an institutional reform, but they try to phrase it as integrationalist as possible. And the word you hear most is corruption reduction, transparency. The word transparency is all over every single document. For federalized Moldova, in all of the judicial system is more of a consequence of what they're trying to pull at a more federalized level. So basically, at the baseline of that project is it's going to have proportional representation in the new bicameral parliament. But how do you divide the federal objects? And they say you go to the place and you hold referendums in Gagauzia and Transnistria on how far they should spread. So you understand what that initially implies is that you're going to have pro-Russian interests over proportionate in the parliament, and you have as well as constitutional now federal courts and local courts, because there is much more autonomy, will have a say in all of local sayings. And also, since they're proposing new constitution, it means new constitutional judges, which also means you have more of a say or more of an ability to influence something as a more powerful actor rather than an actor that obliges the rules. Plus, there's also structural things that might help you in that case, right?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will again add two things. The first about judiciary. Nobody would ever say that judiciary is not important. It's absolutely the core of how if you want something to function, something new politically to function new with the new incentives, with the new outcomes, you would think about judiciary. However, for me, and I think Pavel was here absolutely to the point, judiciary is not so much about what you change institutionally, so the changing of the rules, but how you would create the safeguards for judiciary to be not swallowed by executive. And this is the most kind of routine thing which happens in non-democratic political systems. So you can change. So for example, this I'm biased, but I'm quite skeptical. For instance, this project which Memorial produced, which is more than 1,000 pages wide, because they describe every single very, very small step. Here we're going to do with this type of judges, we are going to do this, and then the whole thing of how the federal legislation should be changed in order to integrate this. The draft of the legislative of the law. So that's why it's so long, the document. However, they have nothing to say. What would guarantee that the judges would be independent, that would not be corrupted, that would be not on the side of the executive? So this is the incentive structure. They are not discussing the incentive structure. So this is not that much. The judiciary, again, it's very important, but it's not it's not self-enforcing. It's not about the institutions that much. So because the system, for instance, that is in Russia, it's all okay. It's like with federalism. The system, okay, but you can live with the system. Like with the problem is that it's not functioned like you want, because it's has again different incentive structure. And regarding the matrix, yes, Natasha, I remember our talks. But what we have now, we have methodology, and methodology is one thing you need to have before you are making this matrix. So to convert the matrix into methodology is the matter of 2 weeks, you know, and you can make several matrices. You can make matrix for comparing the countries. So you have the countries and you have dimensions, yeah, and you make it in it. Or the other way would be to make the optic a little bit deeper, and then you can compare the projects. And again, you have the projects here and the dimensions here, and then you can have this matrix. So this is, but the most important question is how you do it, and this is the question of methodology, and we have it. So, thank you.
There's no one else. I just thought about one idea that might, and again, this is unsolicited advice, but I'm thinking about this distinction between true sort of democratic accountability on one hand and participatory, I think it's called participatory technology, which is kind of, there was this recent book by Hannah Chapman, who builds this theory and then analyzes Putin's direct line. And that's, Cambridge University Press, a pretty good one. And then Daniel Lussier, I think, pioneered that a while ago. And the distinction is that authoritarians would just create the image of listening to the public through direct lines and through, some petition channels that you can set up and then claim, the big sort of boss is listening. And please, provide feedback as to what color the booth, like the electric booth in your courtyard should be. And that's an important decision. We're going to pursue this reform very ambitiously and, repaint it green and so forth. And you feel part of the system, really. But that's not democratic accountability. So if it might be that you can kind of distinguish between reforms as a result of democratic accountability and reform as a result of just whim. But I think all reform proposals are dictated by the elites willing to remain in power. I mean, that's the logic of politics, right? You want to stay in power and you do whatever it takes, either under the pressure from below, or you just, get to think about what could help, stem any discontent and dissatisfaction, and then you propose some largely bogus reforms to just pacify your population. So there might be a way to distinguish between those reform proposals and compare them on that basis. And again, this is unsolicited, and I'm in no way imposing that. But my final quick question is whether on the level of comparison, you could share something that you think is most counterintuitive. Is there anything that you think is counterintuitive that should be a takeaway from your project, having compared those country cases?
Counterintuitive is something puzzling.
Yeah, kind of puzzling, worth exploration, fascinating, amazing, and so forth. Yeah, I'm sorry about those questions. I'm just trying to keep the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Would you like to say something?
Well, I guess the starting point of post-Soviet yet such different progress in terms of political evolution is a great example. And if you take the entire former Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union in here, you can see this path dependency theory really play out, because, for instance, countries that have not been occupied by Russia historically and were part of the Habsburg Empire and subject to different kind of colonization, like Czech Republic and Slovenia, development-wise, have a very different trajectory than the rest of the countries. Then if you take Central Asia versus Baltic states, you have also a lot of different comparisons. And I think the project speaks to that because it's kind of a new truth. You usually unite all of them as former communist countries and assume they all face the same limitations. And the trajectory of, for instance, just Ukraine and Russia and how those civil societies worked very differently also speaks to this path dependency theory of how much historical path can be enduring. And I think that's kind of a new movement within political science to look at the past to see how it influences the present rather than just grand universal theories. And this is another kind of homage to that.
Yeah, so then I will say something. This is about the Hannah Champan and Lucier, and this is the dichotomy between democratic accountability and the idea of this participatory. Yeah, so this is how you imitate. This is a great idea. Thank you very much. It is somehow I have after this seminar, somehow I have the feeling that we exhausted the pool of simple ideas. It was mine. And now we come to the time to test the complicated ideas, and this is yours. So thank you very much for this. And but we will think. I will also try to think how we can do that. And concerning the puzzling or counterintuitive things, what was unexpected, I just if I would think about 10 minutes, I would produce a better answer, but just now, I study authoritarian federalism and decentralization, and for me this is the spread of the decentralization is as kind of on the surface universal practice and institutional solution would be was very puzzling. I didn't expect that. I didn't know. Because I know very well, I think, the experience of Russian Federation. I knew quite well the experience of Ukraine with decentralization, which started after 2014, the decentralization reforms. But I didn't know that all our free cases, projects, and also ongoing reforms would play in this or that aspect with decentralization. Large countries like Kazakhstan, it's not puzzling, but small countries, Moldova, yes, for different reasons. Yeah, for different reasons, also for covering something, for imitating something, but still, like decentralization and not decentralization, meaning they're decentralizing to the regional level, but decentralizing to the local communities. Yeah, like in Ukraine, This is very kind of, because when in Russia we use the word decentralization, it's all about regions. It's absolutely not about local self-government. Only the regions play a role. The local self-government is absolutely suppressed by the regions. Even more. In these countries, this is very different. This is a rise of the local self-governance, probably because, for instance, Tokayev doesn't think that this is kind of risk of his remaining in power. Maybe for different reasons, but still. How this is spread, and this is also they are learning from each other. This decentralization practices. So this is one thing, and the other thing, this is for me it was probably puzzling, but at least very interesting. This is the our normative distinction between reformist and conservative elites. We have. Simplistically, it looks like we have reformist elites who want reform. Why do they want reform? They want reform, Mikhail, you're absolutely right. You want reform either to stay in power, to come to power, if they're in the opposition or in exile. So we have reformist and we have conservative, which also they would refrain from reforms if they don't need it, political reforms, institutional reform. However, we have in our cases we have the whole collection. It's so interesting. So because we have in Belarus where conservative reforms are conservative reforms. Very good, nothing puzzling. And we have this imaginary Belarus. We have reformists who are sitting somewhere else in Poland and Lithuania and making their thinking and making their reform proposals. Okay, we have the in Moldova we have the case where this is reformists. Right, and this is the others who are this is federalization of Moldova. They also want to make reforms, so they are also reformists, although they are not. They're conservative in their nature. But then we have Kazakhstan, where conservative elites play a reformist role, and this is another thing, because there are no democratic Kazakhstan. There are no or almost no like actor. They're not an actor. Probably there are some people, there are something, there are NGOs, but this is not like pro reform proposals like in Belarus. But the Tokayev elites, they take the role, and they're conservative and at the same time reformists. So you have the whole variation again. How you can see it. If I'm sure if we would invite more countries for analysis, we would have more even better collection of the very interesting combination. Or probably not. We don't know, but we will see.
I have just one thing. I think it really interesting was as well, like what you say at the beginning about the using post-Soviet, because, like, for example, if any of the programs of the opposition, there was no single use of word Soviet, so it doesn't exist in this perspective. So actually, as well, it's worth to think that this like all the time framing that in the post-Soviet factor, it's probably already do not say much as how these countries are thinking about themselves, what they want to do, what they want to achieve. So it's as well like, yeah, I think that was totally on the side, but what was really interesting for me personally, like this finding.
Thank you very much. Do we have further questions? Please.
You talk about the Russian factor. Do you observe any cases of these reform movements actually percolating their ideas and their approaches into?
Say it again.
Do you have any examples of, for example, the Belarusian or the Moldovan or the Kazakhstani reform movements or ideas percolating into Russian ideas abroad? Or is it more of like a one-way influence on those countries?
Yeah, so you mean so this is if those who are thinking about reforms in Russia use something of the experience of these countries. The question is no, they're not using that, and for several reasons. One of the reasons and this is kind for me this is I will try a little bit to answer in a little bit broader perspective. What strikes me as a interesting but negative phenomenon, which I observe when the Russian reformists who are sitting in Washington, D.C., in Berlin, so when they're sitting, they still have a deficit, a huge and very expressed deficit of comparative perspective. They don't think about Russia in comparative perspective, because what we tried to do, but we were doing with the smaller countries, and this is the difficulty. One of the complications of dealing with Russia is that these people, and these elites, potential elites who want Russian reforms, they still talk about Russia as a unique country. It's absolutely unique. Russia needs, and they're Democrats. They want to build democratic Russia, but they're not comparative. They're not comparative at all. Still, their premise is that Russia is unique and doesn't need nobody's experience. Although, for instance, Putin doesn't think like that. He takes a lot of repressive experience from Belarus. So I would say he's smarter in this. So he recognizes that something, a lot of mechanisms of their repressions, which were used and instruments and laws, they previously were kind of they come from Belarus to Russia. So this is this, but this is authoritarian boring. So one autocrat from another. But this reformist, and this is it was for me a very bad surprise when I found out that these people who are writing huge projects, they have no idea about comparative literature. No idea about what was, I don't know, Roger Myerson was writing, for instance, no idea about presidentialism, what is the institution of presidentialism, how the presidentialism work in different countries, and this balance between checks and balances between parliamentary system and presidential system. You know, they claim for presidential system in Russia. They have no idea of how parliamentary system. They have no idea what are the constraints and risk of a parliamentary system in the other countries. So that's why I would very much like to see it, how Russian reformists would use the experience, you know, the comparative perspective, the Moldova, even the Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan would be a fantastic case for Russia to study how you can improve the governance without being a democracy. Better authoritarian. This is like to make this your order not open, limited access order versus open access. How you make it limited access order? You have it, but still, like in Kazakhstan, you open it a little bit. At least you make it more competitive. Yeah, you you invite more actors for decision making, you expand your ruling coalition. This is all about Kazakhstan. It would be, I think it is absolutely a must for the Russian reformers to study reforms in Kazakhstan, for instance. They don't do it. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, if we are we done? Yeah. Thank you very much. We are very thankful for the discussion. And my dear Dasha, Valerie, Pavel, большое вам спасибо за потрясающую работу. Спасибо. Thank you very much.